Dear church, let's talk about hiring a preacher. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris McCurley, joined by two great men today, two dear friends of mine, members here at Walnut Street. One I actually work with on a daily basis, Chris Hedge, Matthew Kincade. Guys, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And we are talking about hiring a preacher. And the reason why I wanted to have you two guys on is because you two were the ones who reached out to me at the very beginning of the process for me to come to Walnut Street. And while I don't want to make this podcast about hiring Chris McCurley, I do want to make it about the hiring process and what went into that, because I think there are a lot of churches out there, and we receive, inquiries from other churches asking, what kind of process did y'all use, or what do you recommend? And so I thought, well, this would make a good podcast episode because it is a question. In the old days, you kind of did a preacher parade and you'd bring three guys in and let the congregation kind of give you feedback and determine who it was and that you were going to select. And, things have changed with the internet and being able to go online and watch various preachers. It's kind of changed the game a little bit. And you two guys were instrumental on the committee and the hiring process. And so I wanted to have you guys on to talk about it. First, before we jump into that, though, tell our audience, our viewers, our listeners a little bit about you. Chris, we'll start with you. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I am married to Rachel, as she is a beautiful and talented art teacher, and she is smarter than me and more spiritually strong than I am. And so it's nice to be married to someone like that. We have two kids who give us a lot of joy. I've always been active in church. I love church and been blessed for the last year and a half to be able to come to work every day here as a coordinating minister, which is a blessing.
Absolutely. How about you, Matthew?
So I am married to Megan. We've been married 16 years this year. We got three girls, all under the age of 11. So still a very young household. But I kind of would have to echo what Hedge said in that I married a lady that is much more, she has a much more spiritual strength about her than I do. And so I'm thankful for that. But I've been worshiping with Walnut Street now for about 6 years, and been in the church since, I was 2 days old. So I've always grown up in the church. But yeah, it's been a great time at Walnut Street. We've really found our spot, and it's been a blessing for sure.
Yes. Yeah, you guys are certainly a blessing to me and a blessing to the congregation here. Let's jump into our discussion. We're looking at a process of hiring a preacher. Talk about the processes that was put in place for Walnut Street, the instruction that was given to you by the shepherds, and of course, to put together a committee first. Maybe we should start there. But talk about the putting together of the committee, the instruction that the shepherds gave the committee in order to hire someone.
So they decided to hire a committee rather than do the search and hire themselves. They selected a wide age range of committee members, and also our length of time at Walnut Street varied greatly, which I thought was interesting, but it was deliberate and was also helpful in the process. From the beginning, our very first meeting with the elders, they gave us a charge. They gave it to us verbally and in written form, and that helped guide us the entire process. It included several duties that we were asked to fulfill. Number one, they wanted us to pray continually. They committed that they would do the same throughout the process. They wanted us, obviously, to meet together regularly. They wanted us to identify potential candidates. And after we had identified potential candidates, they asked us to listen to some sermons. At the time, I was working in Nashville. I had about an hour commute to and from work every day. And so because of Facebook and other online platforms, I was able to listen to a lot of preachers' sermons in the spring and summer of that year, but it helped me build this list for our committee. We contacted candidates, we gathered their resumes to see who was interested in interviewing. The elders made sure that we maintained confidentiality. We knew that most people do not want their employer to know that they're talking to a different potential employer, and so we respected and honored that request. Sometimes was difficult because we would have members here who would want to know where we're at in the process, that kind of pump us for information, but we recognized how important it was to maintain that confidentiality. We built a very large pool of potential candidates, but ultimately we narrowed it down to about 24 that we really talked about in depth. And from there, we had a voting process where we chose just a handful that we actually reached out to and interviewed. It lasted about 6 months, and we were thankful to not be rushed, because here at Walnut Street, we had Steve Baggett, who graciously agreed to continue in the pulpit and help us in that time from our previous minister until you. And so we did not have to be rushed, and that was a blessing for us.
Yeah. What do you think, Matthew? As far as your involvement and everything, was it smooth? How did it flow?
It was, it's kind of in the midst of it. It felt like it was a lot longer than 6 months, but looking back, it's a blip on my radar. It's like, oh yeah, we did that. That really went faster than I remember. I think it was interesting that of our committee, we have 7 adults, 1 teenager. We had various ages, but we also had people from, not necessarily people that were lifers, if you will, in terms of, our mix. Not only was it demographically, but from age standpoint, but it was also a mix from how you got to Walnut Street. You look around the room, there were a lot of folks that had only been a part of the Walnut Street family at that time for maybe 3 years. We had some that were there, had been there for their entire life. I personally came to that process. This was my second minister search committee, serving on a search committee within really a couple, 3 years. And so I had some prior experience at the congregation we were attending, serving on that committee, compared to serving on this one. And I would say one of the big differences between those two occurrences was on the first search committee, we were kind of fed our list. Go check these people out kind of deal. It was more of a vetting process. So that was fine, and it worked well. With this go round, we had obviously a different dynamic because we had COVID that kept people from worshiping in person. So you had all this content that was created during 2020 and 2021. What Chris is talking about there, what Hedge is talking about, being able to see a great snapshot of different messages that ministers were putting out there, and you didn't have to run around everywhere to get a feel for what content they produced. And so it was different in that regard, but we didn't have to just take the list we were fed. With this search committee, Hedge did a really good job of building out a kind of a funnel for us to work through. And I kind of liken it unto the draft. It was like an NFL draft. It was great. He had great snapshot photo, demographic info about the family. We weren't just picking. You're not just picking the minister. You're also, you got to consider the family. And so Hedge did a really good job of helping us kind of see, okay, here's the background of this particular family. What would they bring to the table? We're not trying to pick a all-star here. We're trying to see a real person in their real life and their actual, authentic walk with God. Is it something that would fit? And that was a constant, reminder of is it congruous to the family at Walnut Street? Because we're not hiring just a role here. we're bringing in a family, and I think that's a big consideration that the committee needs to really think about. And this is hard to have a podcast with the person we hired to say some of these things, but there are moments where you're not hiring just because of their dynamic speaking abilities. You're hiring because of the personality. And we got lucky in that you have both, but I think committees don't need to get hung up so much on how powerful of a speaker they are and just throw out the consideration of, well, will they fit? Will the family work? And so that's part
Yeah,
of it.
that's a great point. Because you're not just a preacher, you're a family member now, and you're going to be infused in this family. And do they work? Do they function here? Because, dynamics are different everywhere. It doesn't mean that, they're off base or off kilter. That's just different in different places. Geographically, it's different. The makeup of the church is different, all those kind of things. And so fit is, and honestly, that is, I can speak for preachers. We do the same thing. We're interviewing the committee and then potentially the elders to see if we are a good fit as well. And I think committees and elderships need to understand that when they're looking for a preacher is that, you may feel like you're in the catbird seat in that you are interviewing them and, they really want the job and you're just feeling them out to see if they would be a good fit. A lot of times the preacher doesn't know if he wants the job and he wonders if he's a fit. And so he's interviewing you guys the same way that y'all are interviewing him. And our shepherds really understood that. Our committee understood that. One thing that I wanted to hit on that you said there, your committee was very well put together. It was a variety of ages. It was a variety of, it was diverse, male, female. I love the fact that you had a teenager on there, because I feel like that's so often an overlooked group in the congregation when it comes to decisions like this. But you included a teenager, and I feel like that was a really good decision because, they should have some say in this as well. Like anybody else, they're sitting there every Sunday and listening to the preacher, and, they have an idea of what they would like to see as well and like what they'd like to have in a minister. I just thought that was a really good idea. You can comment on that if you'd like, but I just thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, perspective matters. Like you said, male, female. I can't tell you how many times that we would have a comment or an addition to our discussions made by one of our female members of the committee. I can't. Obviously, I can't gain that perspective any other way. And so they added a great dynamic to our search. Having a teenager on the group as well. Chris can speak to this a little bit more deeply, but they're seeing things that we're not. I don't want to think I'm young, but I'm not. They're seeing things and considering things from a perspective of a different dynamic and different age. And I think that was also important for us at Walnut Street in particular as to our transition. What were we looking for? What are we hoping to achieve? Not just as having somebody up there in the pulpit that's speaking to us, but what are we hoping to achieve and grow as a church? Who do you want to speak to? The lost. And you need all the perspectives that you can gain. Male, female, young, old, local, transplant, it doesn't matter. You need to hear from those differing opinions because, the lost, they look different. It's not just one box that you can't put the lost into. Everybody comes from different backgrounds. And so anyway, it was a good idea. That came from shepherds, that when they were planning how many people would be on the committee and who would be on the committee, that was all drawn up by them.
One of the things too that I had heard that the shepherds said was that, and they actually made this announcement to the congregation, is that we have to take care of the spiritual needs of the congregation. That's why we are, for lack of a better word, offloading this to the committee. Now, obviously, when it came down to the selection of one or two candidates that you were going to bring to them, then they would take it from there. But I love the fact that they said, as shepherds, we are in charge of the spiritual health and welfare of this congregation. We don't need to, push that aside while we get immersed into a hiring. And so they let the committee take it and run with it. I thought that was a really good idea. Hey, talk a little bit about some challenges in this process. I'm sure there were a few. What were some things that you dealt with that were challenges along the way?
Challenge was the congregation wanted a voice because we were not bringing in 3 or 5 preachers to try out on a Sunday morning and then allowing the congregation to give their opinion to the committee or to the shepherds. The congregation still wanted a voice. And the process did last several months. And so the members at different times wanted to know what was happening with the search. They had not heard maybe much as we're coordinating our own schedules within the committee to conduct interviews and things like that. We did provide them an opportunity to provide input in that we asked the congregation to include elders and otherwise suggest names for us and let us research them. So many preachers have an online presence now that it's easier to gain information about them and to consume their content. And so the congregation wanted a voice, and the way that we provided them that opportunity was to give us some names of preachers that you know about that we don't. And so we can listen to their sermons, and if we wanted to proceed in the process with them, we could. But members were maybe antsy to be able to have their voice heard.
Yeah, because that was the old school way of doing things, right? You bring in two or three. I called it a preacher parade a while ago, but you bring them in, you parade them through, and people get to select. And if I'm involved in that process, I want to be the last guy, right? I want to be the one that goes last so that people remember me. And but with the advent of the internet, you can get on there, you can watch sermons, things like that. And I've always said a good eldership will act democratically when they can, but this is not a democracy. The church is not a democracy in that everybody gets a vote necessarily. Sometimes maybe, but you appointed these men to make these tough decisions. And I think I can see how that would be a challenge. I feel like the shepherds handled that well, though. Matthew, what do you think?
We had a wonderful blessing of guest speakers through the process. Hedge already alluded to the fact that our own Steve Baggett was able to fill the role most of the weeks. We had guest speakers come that it was reminded to the congregation, these are not ministers trying out, they're just guest speakers. And one of the, I guess, challenges would be we would have a person come and guest speak and knock everybody's socks off. And I would be in it because everybody knew I was on the committee. I would be inundated with, you got to get that person, get that person, get that guy, And I think there's a certain element of trust the process. I know that's a cliche. And we did, take in those comments of how you got to reach out to that person. You got to contact that person. We're interested. They're great, and we did, flesh that out a little bit, but you got to trust the process. And as a congregation, I had a unique perspective in that I knew what else was out there, whereas the congregation just saw one half of it. And when they experienced somebody that was a very dynamic speaker, it was, a great presenter of the word. I also knew what else was out there. When that individual did not indicate any interest, I wasn't disheartened. Whereas the people that were like really blown away by that speaker, when they found out, oh, he's not interested, it was like, oh, so yeah. I think that was somewhat of a challenge in that as a congregation, you want to really lock in or lock down somebody that's going to be great. And as a committee member, I tried to remind myself, I'm not trying to pick somebody that's going to do a great gospel meeting. I'm not trying to pick somebody that's going to do great for a month or two. I'm trying to pick somebody that is more of a long-term view, like a long-term lens. And that's probably a blessing in that we had all that online content. But you only get so much from, I'm trying probably speaking out of both sides of my mouth, but you only get so much by watching a few sermons.
Yeah.
You're going to have to trust the process and rely on your faith that God is going to lead the right person to the position. And that's where the prayer came in. Obviously we as a committee prayed over this. The shepherds, that their commitment to us was that they would as well. And it was a constant reminder to the congregation as well. So that if there was any abundance in this whole process, it was an abundance of prayer. And so that took a lot of the pressure off me. I didn't feel like I had to pick the right guy. I knew that the right person and the right family would come to us just naturally. We had some things in place that helped us filter through, but we weren't hung up on, oh, this isn't the right guy. And, just kind of be aware of that.
It's a common thing for an eldership, a church to say, well, we had this type of person in our last preacher, So we're going to swing the pendulum the other way. So if we had an older gentleman, we're going to swing the pendulum and get a younger gentleman, or vice versa. And a lot of times going into it, a congregation or the shepherds of a congregation will have an idea of what they want, and you go from there. It didn't seem that way with this. With this search, it didn't seem like he's got to be this old, he's got to have this amount of experience, because every church would like a 30-year-old with a beautiful wife, 3 cute kids, and 50 years experience, right? And it just doesn't work that way. But, some will say, well, he's got to have a Bible degree or even a PhD. And there didn't seem to be those restrictions on you guys. Talk a little bit about that. Did the shepherds give you any sort of, this is the mold we want, or was it just, hey, find us the right guy?
They asked us to find a man who was passionate about the word and passionate about his people. And so that can look a lot of different ways and with a lot of diverse men in the brotherhood. And so we were not bound by any restrictions like that, other than we wanted a man who loved God and loved his people.
I think that's a good approach. Go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to say, we watched some men speak and preach that were passionate for sure. Mm-hmm. But it got to be, it's like, okay, don't get you screamy.
Yeah.
And so there's like this balance of, what does that passion for the word or passion for his people really look like? What does it mean? And that's when it's a good thing to have, 7 other people on the committee to say, let's look at this from a lens of multiple eyes. Does he check the box that's been given to us? Right. And yeah, you're right. They didn't tell us that it had to fit into this certain demographic. We didn't want somebody that was just like, I hate to be whatever, but kicking it out of gear near the end of their time from the pulpit. Mm-hmm. And we didn't want somebody that was just getting started writing their sermons. Yeah. We did have this kind of, I guess in my mind, I had an average experience, average tenure in my mind.
Right.
Because I know me personally, I've been a Christian since I was 11, and my walk hasn't really matured until the last 10 years. You know, so that was one of the things that kind of intrigued me about you, in particular, with your times as your age of your walk, if you will. You looked a little different than a lot of the people that we looked at, in terms of how you came to be Chris McCurley, how you came to be where you are, not only in your career, your profession, professionally, but how you came to be where you are personally. And that you were unique in that, and that drew my attention and my eyes to look at you a little closer. And too, we had some great candidates. We had Hedge can probably allude to this too, but we had a mindset of, we wanted to make it for the shepherd. We wanted to give them a hard decision. We wanted to give them like 2 or 3 names that when they look at it, like, we just can't go wrong, no matter who we pick. And so that was ultimately our approach, is to let's find some names that is good. We're going to make it hard on the shepherds to make the ultimate call, because we got really good candidates. And I think we did that.
We had a broad search. We weren't limited to the Middle Tennessee area, and we weren't limited in age or anything. And so we built a very large list of about 120 names. Most of those men never knew that their names were on our list. Never knew. We thought about them, researched them, talked about them. But it allowed us to the best of our ability, find the right fit. We asked our committee members to generate interview questions. And so it wasn't that the elders had given us a list of questions. We wrote our own. And so I had a perspective of a 38-year-old man who had been here about 6 or 7 years at the time versus maybe a lady who'd been here her entire life of 70 years. We built our own questions on what we felt was important and what would help us find that right fit. And so we had a very broad approach that the elders allowed us. And obviously we went all the way to Texas and to find one. Thankfully, we had Zoom and things like that in order to conduct the interviews, even though I would rather have been face-to-face with all of the interviews and everything like that. But wasn't convenient. And so it wasn't also required for us because of the technology that we had.
Yeah, and one thing that I greatly appreciated was the communication aspect of it, because as a minister, now my situation was different in that I wasn't really looking to leave. I'd been there 14 years. I thought we would retire there. And so this wasn't like me searching. And so, when you get that phone call, would you be interested in all that? One of the first things I thought was, I've been at this long enough. I'm not going to do a preacher parade and all that kind of stuff. What's the process look like? What is this? And you guys were always honest and upfront from the very beginning. When you two guys called me and I was on my front porch in Abilene, you said, hey, this is going to be a long process. This is just going to, you're just going to have to deal with that. And I'm like, I got all the time in the world. I'm not looking to leave. I'm not being forced out here. This is not a big deal to me. But all along the way, you guys were communicative and you talked about the next steps and all of that. I appreciate that. Talk a bit about the communication, because as a minister, most of them are kind of antsy about, what's this going to look like if I do move? I got to look at schools for my kids, and my wife needs to find a job and all that. And so, there is a sense where you kind of get some guys hanging on the line out there. Was there constant communication with all the candidates? How did that look, and what was that like?
We did make a purposeful attempt to try to keep candidates up to date on our progress. We kept our shepherds up to date on the progress. We had 2 shepherds that were assigned to our committee as liaisons. We provided them a monthly update of where we were at through that process. And throughout the months of the search, a couple of times our shepherds did get up before the congregation just to let them know the search was ongoing, to please be patient with us. And so we were mindful of the length of time that it was taking, necessitating that we keep everyone informed on where we were at.
What were you going to say, Matthew?
Really just that. I know once we had not a letter of intent from you, but basically we had from you an indication that you would be interested in a conversation. You would be interested in continuing the process. I think at that point, thankfully we had shepherds that were willing to say, you guys bring us the name, and as to the details, as to the logistics, because I'm just going to speak to you personally. I've never gone through a job change. I've been in the role that I'm in now for 17 years this year, and I cannot imagine the questions in my mind that I would want to have answered before I took the step and decided, yes, I'm going to do something different. I'd have to know a lot of logistics as to what's going to make my life work the way it's working today. Right. I would want to know where I'm going to live, where my kids are going to be in school, if my spouse is working, and I'm thankful that the shepherds, once we gave them the names, a lot of that logistics work, they told us as a committee, you don't worry about how it's going to happen. Just bring us the name. And so we had the capacity and space to then go, okay, let's focus on the family that we're looking at. Let's focus on the dynamics of their personality. And we weren't burdened with, if I can use that phraseology, we weren't burdened with how we were going to make it work. And I think I personally asked the shepherds one of the meetings early on, do we need to try and filter down our list of names based on who we can support? And they said, no, you go find who will be the best fit. And that was freeing in that I didn't have to worry about all those, particulars. And I was able to focus as a committee person as to, okay, if it's meant to be, it's going to work out. It's going to find its way to work out. But I wasn't burdened with having to come up with those logistics. And that's important for a committee member, not to feel like they've got to, we didn't write the job description, Hedge. We asked that of the shepherds to put together a job description for us, and that was helpful.
Yeah, those are good points, because if you have somebody that's been at a church a long time, they're earning a decent salary, I want to know, are my hands tied? I mean, if we talk to this gentleman and we find out that he makes X amount of dollars, is there going to say, well, that's out of our price range. This is what we want to pay. Like we talked about earlier, are there restrictions placed on the committee to say, unless they meet these criteria, then, we're not going to go further with them. So that is very liberating to know that, hey, we don't have those restrictions. Hey, as we close up here, both of you, let me know if there was somebody coming to you and saying, hey, we're thinking about hiring a preacher. We need to, we're looking at a process. Any advice you could give us? What would you say, Chris?
So if the elders were going to go the route of a committee, I appreciated the way that our elders went about it, in that they selected the committee and then they gave us a charge. They gave us some goals with the ultimate goal of identifying 2 or 3 men to present to them. In the months in between, they left us alone and let us do our work. And that was helpful to us. We didn't feel that we had to go to them every week to ask questions. They provided us what we needed. And then as a committee, we diligently, we were communicating weekly. We met a couple of times a month until we got the job finished. And we enjoyed our time together. We laughed more than I ever thought that we would have. It was kind of sad when it was over, but it was also a blessing when we got that call from one of our elders that they had offered you the position and that you had accepted it. But the charge to the completion of the committee went smoothly because of our elders here, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. How about you, Matthew? What advice would you give to anyone thinking about, putting together a committee or a process?
I would say my advice would be to a committee person, if you're chosen to serve on this committee, would be to consider those folks that have really strong networks that you might not normally consider. We had great resources available in terms of the internet, in terms of, looking out there, but being able to talk to some seasoned, faithful members of the congregation that knew everybody everywhere, that was a great resource to us. But yeah, just in terms of just building our filter, I'd say don't discount anything. Look with open eyes, and just again trust the process of the right person's going to rise to the top, and the right fit is going to become evident. The main thing I would take away is continue in prayer, because goodness, there are many decisions that we make every single day that you just don't know which direction to go, and just taking a few serious meditative moments and praying about something, clarity comes, and it's oftentimes unexpected, but clarity will come through that process. And I'd say the committee needs to be prayerful as a group, praying together, but also as committee members individually, spending time in that prayer, because it really, really it does work, and it works every single time.
Yeah. Great stuff, guys. Thank you so much for being on today. I want to tell our viewers and listeners that if you have a question about today's episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a specific question for Chris and or Matt, we'll make sure that we forward that email along to them. I'm sure they'd be willing to answer any questions that you might have. As always, thank you for tuning in. Chris, Matt, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Absolutely. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.
God has blessed me with a life of missionary service that has taken me from gang members in the large cities of the United States to the deepest jungles of Central Africa. Along the way, He's blessed me with the wisdom of many evangelists who have verbalized their faith so that others may know Jesus. In our series, we're going to be exploring the mission of God. Join us as we explore the mission of God.